Namaskar and a very warm welcome to everyone joined in today on our week 71 Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo talk. This talk is being organized by the Central Zoo Authority in New Delhi as part of the ongoing Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. The Mahotsav is a 75-week-long celebration to commemorate 75 years of India's independence, which falls on the 15th of August 2022. The Central Zoo Authority is taking the celebration forward through a massive outreach campaign entitled Conservation to Coexistence, The People Connect. Under the helm of this campaign, we will be showcasing 75 conservation priority species and 75 zoos, highlighting one species and one zoo each week. We are currently in week 71 of the celebration with the hog deer as the species in focus and the Adina Deer Park as the zoo in focus. So joining today to speak to us on this species is Ms. Dr. Alolika Sinha, who is a conservation biologist at the Adena. Alolika did her doctorate on the ecology of hog deer with emphasis on the different habitat and anthropogenic factors that influence the habitat use of the species. And she's currently overseeing conservation projects that help build scientific evidences needed to conserve species, their habitats, and ensure overall well-being. She has presented her work at various national and international forums apart from publications and has also been the recipient of various travel grants for furthering her work. She will speak to us today more on the species in focus and its conservation challenges. So over to you, Alolika. Please begin.
Thank you, Arundhati, and thanks for the introduction. Should I straight away start the presentation?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Are my slides visible?
No, they're not visible yet.
Okay, so maybe wait for 2 seconds and.
Okay.
They're not yet visible, right?
Yes, they're not visible yet.
Oh.
Yes, now it's visible.
Now it's visible, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it shows the title slide, Arundhati?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I would, like to extend my gratitude for inviting me to present a talk here. I kept the title Hog Deer Hogging Limelight eventually. Hog Deer is in India particularly. There are so many of high-profile species that we have. Hog deer in context to India or globally, where was sidelined for a long time, but slowly, it started gaining conservation attention. And it makes me immensely happy to know that it's one of the priority species that we have for Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Today, through this talk, I will be delving into a very briefly into the hog deer species biology and ecology and highlight the doctoral research work that I undertook in Manas National Park and how that helped us in coming up with a pragmatic and have an informed conservation decisions that we can aid in. So in this very first slide, I have put down the pictures of the species and the habitat just to show the people are intricate relationship that the species have with the hog deer of the grassland habitat. It's a grassland specialist species, and how improving the grassland habitat can eventually help in improving in safeguarding the species. So as Arundhati mentioned, I am a conservation biologist from Adena, and I mostly work in Assam in the northeast part of India. So to begin with, what are hog deers? Hog deer is a very small tropical deer that is known to occur in South and Southeast Asia. Historically, it occurred abundantly throughout the region. So this is the distributional map that we have for hog deer. This has been adopted from the IUCN, and the green portions that you see are the extent distributional range of hog deer in South and Southeast Asia. Currently, it occurs in India, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, and Myanmar and Cambodia. In Thailand, it went, locally extirpated. It was locally extirpated, but it has been reintroduced in the country, and now it's doing quite well. Further, the species has been introduced beyond its original distribution range in the across the continents in USA, in Sri Lanka, and Australia. And ironically, the population in all this, the introduced population in these countries are doing pretty well when compared to the original population, the native population in South and Southeast Asia. The species, two species are recognized for this species, the Axis porcinus porcinus, which we have mostly in South Asia, and the Axis porcinus anamyticus that we have in Southeast Asia. But in a recent study, some 2 or 3 years ago, the subspecies anamyticus is also found in Manipur. We have a small population of hog deer in the Keibul Lamjau National Park of Manipur, and this belongs to a subspecies anamyticus. It has more resemblance with the Southeast Asian, subspecies other than the mainland India or the global distribution range. So it's a small deer. It doesn't stand more than a meter long. It's very stocky, and I have for reference, I have tried to put down a few pictures. And since it's a deer species, as you all might know, that only the males in the deers have the antlers. What we see that horn, we call it antlers, and it is shed annually. For hog deer, we have a typical three tined. It's three the antlers are branched. It's three branched. We have three tined hog deer, which three tined sorry antler, which are shed annually before the rutting season. You can see in one of the pictures in the left hand side, that's three hog deers with two males and the females. The females do not have antlers, and the antlers, they are in velvet state. It is regrowing. When the hog deer sheds the antlers and it regrows, the initial stage is very velvety in its look. So it's called the velvet. The hog deer again very sexually size dimorphic, which means that the females and the male sizes differ significantly. The females are much smaller than the males are, as evident from the picture on the left hand side. And one of the characteristics of this species, mostly of the South Asian population, and that of Myanmar, is that when the fawns are born, the fawns are generally spotted. You can see the picture on the right hand side. All the fawns are born with spots in it, and sometimes these spots are written even in the adulthood, but mostly it's, the spots fades away when the hog deer attains adulthood, but in some cases it might get retained. And but again, the population of Cambodia and the population that we had in southern Vietnam before was not known to be spotted. And another characteristics of this species is, flashing of its white tail. You see in the picture middle here, a hog deer fawn, flashing its tail with a white underpart. So that's one of the characteristics of hog deer, that has a white underpart of the tail, and that they use as an alarm when they are threatened, and kinds of send signals to the other group members. Yeah, as I already mentioned, that hog deers are obligatory to the grassland habitats. The hog deer is a habitat specialist species. If you can see in this picture on the left hand side, there is a head, a head of the hog deer popping out from the grassland habitat. So it needs a mosaic of tall and short grasslands for its existence, and it is exclusively a habitat specialist species. Also, the species is mostly solitary. You might see congregation of this species, that the species might, a few individuals might come together during feeding or resting, but it's essentially a solitary species, with only association is of mother and fawn, or while during the breeding season of the adults, male and the females. Now, having said this, there are a few threats that a species faces, and the primary threats are habitat degradation and hunting. The species throughout its range is hunted for consumption, for its meat, and because it's a habitat specialist species, so any changes in its habitat, any disturbances threatens the species, and this resulted, in a species being confined only to the protected areas, because we have minimum disturbances there. So the species which occurred, the hog deer which occurred beyond the protected areas in the grasslands and non-protected areas along the river banks are almost gone currently. But the hog deer, as I mentioned, is slowly gaining conservation attention. So before the species used to be very much abundant, and given its abundant and the lack of studies on it, the species was not even assessed until 2008 by the IUCN. So in 2008, when there were anecdotal reports of the species going extirpated from the local areas, it's being hunted out, and all other related issues, the species was assessed, and it was found that the species came down to such a low number that it has to be categorized within the category of an endangered species. Having after 4 or 5 years down the line, even the Indian government, under the Wildlife Protection Act, they've upgraded the species from Schedule 3 to Schedule 1, that is, rendering more protection to the species. And also the subspecies, that is Anameticus, is listed in the appendix 2 of the CITES. So coming to hog deer in Indian context, the original range of hog deer in India extended from the Indo-Gangetic Plain to the Brahmaputra Valley of the Northeast India, across the northern states of Haryana, Punjab, Uttarakhand, Bihar, and northern part of West Bengal. Uh, However, the species, given the rate of habitat degradation and loss, and rampant hunting, it went a dramatic range decline, and it was extirpated from most of its original distributional range. Currently, the species occurs in a span along the Tarai belt. Tarai region is which occurs along the Himalayan foothills and the Gangetic plains, and so this species now occurs along this belt, with its westernmost distribution in India in the Corbett National Park, and the easternmost in the Namdapha Tiger Reserve in Arunachal Pradesh. And but mostly this species beyond the protected areas, it occurs in a very isolated and patchy population. So these are the few pictures of the hog deer from Assam. Coming to Assam, Assam in the northeastern state of India is one of the strongholds of this species for sure. If you go to places like Kaziranga and Orang National Park, you can see hog deers in multiple numbers, in more than hundreds and thousands. So Assam is definitely one of the strongholds of the hog deer population. And ecologically also, this species plays a very important role, as it's a prey species for many large carnivores, and more so in the regions such as Northeast India, where we do not have abundant cheetal population. We don't have cheetal after a certain limit of the Manas Tiger Reserve. We don't have cheetal beyond that, the spotted deer. So where this hog deer and the large carnivores co-occur, they are important pre-species for both the large carnivores and also the medium-sized carnivores. Given this background, however, given that India is one of the strongholds of hog deer, we had a very good population of hog deer, but then not much studies on the species were undertaken. Most of the ecological information, the conservation actions that needed to be taken, are derived from the studies that were undertaken in Nepal. There were very detailed studies on hog deer undertaken in Nepal, but very, very few studies in India. Most of the information that come from India are the anecdotal reports while studying other high profile species, maybe tiger and other species. Well, in the last like 2 decades, there were two studies with a commonality in it. Both were master dissertation from Wildlife Institute of India. Dr. Sonali Ghosh and Dr. Tanushree Vishwas, they undertook a study. One was conducted in Corbett National Park, the other one the Jaldapur National Park. But beyond that, there were no studies on hog deer to understand its conservation needs. So I kind of undertook this as a part of my doctoral research. Studied the hog deer in Manas National Park of Northeast India. And in a while, I'll come why I chose to study the hog deer in Manas National Park. Yeah, Arundhati, I'm just pinging in. So far, it's going good, right? I'm still.
Yes, yes, you're audible and it's going fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There's a thing with this online
No,
issues.
no problem, no problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so coming to that, why I chose to study the hog deers in Manas National Park, because there's a history. There's a history that's lying there. The Manas National Park, for the unaware, it's located. You can see the map here. It's located in the northeast part of India and along the Bhutan border, and it's a very potential site for the grassland species. So this I mentioned about Tarai region. So the Tarai region in India is again due to loss of habitat and fragmentation. It's been clearly divided into the Western Tarai and the Eastern Tarai. And the Eastern Tarai, Manas National Park falls in the Eastern Tarai, which have extensive grassland habitat that is home to many species that are grassland obligates beyond the hog deer, like the pygmy hog, the Bengal frolic, and the one-horned rhinoceros. So an excellent habitat that we have there. But during the late 1980s to early 2000, there was this socio-political upheaval that led to decline of not only of the wildlife population habitat, but also it kind of stopped the entire conservation actions that is needed to protect the species and the habitat. But after signing a peace accord, and after the normalcy and governance resumed in the place in 2000, from 2003 onwards, the park was reviving. But most of the conservation attention was again given in securing high profile species like the hog deer, sorry, like the tigers or rhinos. And more of the attention was given in strengthening law enforcement. And again, hog deer was in it got a very little attention. Again, the hog before this the socio-political upheaval actually began. There were tens of thousands of hog deer that Manas National Park once harbored. But only a remnant, only a few handful of hog deers left by the time the armed conflict was over, and the conservation was slowly gaining the momentum in the park. And also of whatever the present condition, there were a lot of issues that could potentially impact the hog deer, like the spatial decline of the grassland habitat. There were invasive species in the grassland habitats. There were other anthropogenic disturbances in the form of cattle grazing, human disturbances. So all those could have a potential impact on hog deer. So keeping this in mind, we conducted an ecological study to understand the conservation needs of hog deer, and how we can aid in making an informed conservation decision to safeguard the species and its habitat as well. So for this, what we actually did is to understand the conservation needs of habitat. We went out and we first assessed like what is the status of the grasslands here, because without grasslands the hog deer will not survive. So we wanted to understand like what is the there were reports that there was special decline of the grassland, and there was even a study before this that showed that there is a significant decline in the grassland habitat. So we assessed the grassland habitat in a decadal scale of 30 years. We took 5 satellite imageries, and using the GIS and tools, we kind of did a change detection analysis, which is basically showing how different habitats, how different land use have changed over time. So we have taken 5 such satellite imageries of the year 1988, 95, 2003, 2011, and 2019. And in this picture, there is a clear contrast. You can see in 1988, all those lighter green portion are the grasslands, and the darker green are the woodlands. Over a period of 30 years, almost 50% of the grasslands in Manas National Parks were gone to woodland encroachment, were gone to human encroachment as well. Those yellow portion in the picture below you were encroached by people. So in a span of 30 years, almost 50% of the habitat that the grassland obligates were dependent upon were gone. So having this is one of the findings that we have. Okay, so we have come down to there is a massive decline of the habitat. Next, of the existing grassland habitat, which is roughly around 170 square kilometer of the total area, what we found that, oh sorry, this is a graphical representation of the decline in the grassland habitat and the increase in the woodland habitat. So the green and the blue portion shows decline in two broad types of grasslands, the alluvial grasslands and the savanna grasslands that we have in Manas, while the gray portion, you can see there is an increase, that's the increase in the woodland area of the Manas. In the existing grassland, which is again around 170, roughly around 170 square kilometer, we undertook grid-based surveys. I'm not going to detail of the methodology. We did surveys and we found out that these grasslands are again affected by invasive species, like alien invasive species. Alien invasive species are the plants that are not native to a particular ecosystem, and they can, have a negative impact on the native biodiversity. So while doing the survey, we found that in Manas National Park we have mostly two alien invasive species, the Chromolena odorata and the Mykinia migranta, and these two species are even enlisted as the 100 most invasive plants in the world. So all the yellow and the purple dots that you see in the green area is again the grasslands area in Manas, and the yellow and the purple dots are the extension at the extent of the invasion. So while we did the survey and did our analysis, we found that the 30% of the existing grassland, which is around 170 square kilometer, is again threatened by invasion by this invasive alien species. So with this information in hand, we had two information like the grasslands are declining and the existing grasslands are again affected by negatively affected by the invasive plants. So what we did, we did surveys, we undertook surveys to understand how this is kind of influencing the hog deer in Manas. So we did surveys. In the map you see there, those black straight lines are the transit. There's a method called line transit sampling. I adopted the line transit sampling. I surveyed the grasslands of the central and the eastern range of Manas National Park during 2014, 15, and 15, 16, the dry seasons. And we so the grasslands in Manas are really tall. You can see, you can refer to the picture below. So we did transects from the elephant back, like we surveyed the area from the elephant back. We took down the necessary parameters like the number of animals seen, how far is the animal from me, is the observer. We took all the information. We have through a standard data sheet, and we have a software called a distance software where we feed in all this information to come up with an estimate of the hog deer population there. So in this two dry seasons, which is from November to February of 14, 15, and 15, 16, I spent around, a total effort invested was around 206 kilometers, which gave us a sighting of around 202 hog deers. And feeding in all this information, we came up with a population estimation. I'm not going into the statistical details here. So the overall density of the hog deer in the park was found to be around 18 hog deer per square kilometer, which when extrapolated with the size of the grassland habitat, it was estimated that around 3,500 to 4,000 hog deer still remains in the national park. Having collected the information from the field, we again fit in the information in using GIS tools. It was done in QGIS, a very popular platform nowadays, to find out like what are the hotspots, within Manas for the hog deer. So that we can kind of streamline our conservation efforts in protecting those grasslands in those areas, minimizing the disturbances. So we developed a heat map which kind of gave you the hotspots of hog deer in Manas National Park. And we found that it's mostly distributed in areas which are dominated by two particular species of grasses called the Emperor cylindrica, and it kind of like mosaic of tall and short grasslands. And within the management block, we have different management units in the Manas National Park. So there are two areas called the Kuribil in the central range and the Rupuhi Abodara block in the eastern range. Those are the hotspots for hog deer, or to say, those are the hotspots for many grassland dependent species there. And I'll come to this why they're the hotspots. Now, having this information, again, we wanted to have a look at the population, like how the hog deer are doing. So we have the information like what is the number of hog deer in there, but to add to another layer, a deeper layer to which we kind of estimated like what is the ratio of the adult to adult female to adult male to the fawn. So we found that for every 100 females, we have around 47 males and around 18 fawns. So that's a very female biased population that we have, that is very characteristic species. So this is again a graphical representation of all the different categories of the population structure. And we also found that though when you visit areas like Kaziranga or a national park, you can see hog deer in groups, but hog deer is essentially a solitary species. It mostly occurs singly, either with a mother and fawn, or maybe during the breeding season with an adult male or adult female. But it's mostly a solitary species. But there are congregations, like it can fit together, it can come into group, it can fit together, but then it again disperse in their own direction. So it's essentially a solitary animal, and this has also been reported by earlier studies as well. Okay, now within the broad grassland habitat, uh, in Manas, there are some 170 square kilometer of grasslands, but within this broad grassland habitat, the grasslands occurs in different assemblages. Like they have their own community. So there are, in a previous study, it was identified there are around 7 grass assemblages. So I wanted to check like what the preference of hog deer at this habitat preference of hog deer at this finer scale. One, the fact is established the grassland, the hog deer, you know s- uh, the hog deer stays in the grasslands, but at the finer details what kind of grassland is prefer, whether it has a preference or not, and if it has a preference, why does it has a preference. I wanted to look into a deeper a version of the habitat use pattern. And through my study, what we could establish is like uh, hog deer prefer the grassland habitats which have a dominance of species like Imperator cylindrica, comparatively shorter grasslands when I compare to the sub-Himalayan grasslands that we have in Manas. And it also, kind of occurs in Imperator Naringa associations. So again, we collected data from the field through the line transit method. We feed into a into a analytical, called the Mendes selection ratio, and that selection ratio gives you a value. Like if the value is one or more than one, that tells you that the species like certain kind of habitat, and if the value is less than one, it does not use that habitat. So through this analysis, we could found out that hog deer, likes uh, habitat dominated by Imperata and Imperata naringa species. And when I put it into in a more general terms, that means that hog deer likes to stay in a habitat that has a mosaic of both tall and short grasslands. Short grassland, it uses it as a food, and tall grassland as a cover from the predators, as a resting ground. And this is also evident from the area. You can see in the graph in the right hand side, it tells you use versus availability, which essentially means that the black dots, suppose we have 1 square kilometer of Imperata and 5 square kilometer of Imperata Narenga, but it is most of the hog deers are found in the Imperata, so it is used more than its availability. There's a lot of analysis that goes on, and then it comes up with this good looking figures that kinds of give you an indication of what it is preference. So most of both of the hog habitat study was done in the dry season, and in a very generalized and layman's language, I can put it up that hog deer likes to stay in habitat that has both short and tall grasslands to meet its requirement of having food and cover. Again within this, so we have now come up we have now have been handed what kind of habitat does the grassland prefers. Now I wanted to look into what are the factors that actually impact this hog deers. So what I have found that the grass species, mostly the Imperator cylindrica, have a positive impact. That is, the more the Imperator dominated grassland, there are more chances that the hog deer will use those habitats, while the habitat that are only dominated by Naringa porphyriforma grasses have a negative impact. And this can be attributed to the fact that Naringa is not a very preferred species of feeding species for the hog deer. While the invasive species like the Cromolina odorata and Mycenia migranta, they have a negative impact. That the areas that have more invasion by these two species, the Mycenia and the Cromolina, there is a less likelihood of hog deer occurrence in those areas. So with this, with the data that I collected from the field, and with the use of, there are a lot of technological advancements, and there is a approach called habitat suitability modeling, where you can feed in the data that you collect from the field, or maybe it's published by other author. You can take those data and you can feed in this models. For this case, I use a model called Maxent, and that can give you a potential. That can give you a potential habitat of the species within a larger landscape. So I did this for Manas, and I found out that uh, you see the maps here, that highlighted portion, the red and the orange, those are the areas which are, there's a greater likelihood of hog deer using those habitat. These habitats kind of have more hog deers in the other parts. And again, this is also explained by the fact that imperator grass and the imperator narenga grass had the highest contribution to the model. I'm not going in details of the model. People interested can, send me an email, and I would love to explain it further. Okay. Having said this, so we have all this information in hand, like what kind of habitat it prefers, how many hog deers are there in Manas, and what are the factors that have an positive and both negative impact on hog deer. So having this information on one hand, we also come across a major challenge, and I'll come to this now. So this is again the repetition of the same map. This map shows you the potential habitat. Uh, Both the maps basically shows the same information. So this map shows you the potential habitat of hog deer in Manas National Park. In a separate study by a team of which I'm also part of, we found out that those red areas you see, so these are the areas that have high probability of invasion by alien species, mostly by Cromolina and Mycania, if we do not have any management intervention in place. And unfortunately, if you compare these two maps, these two set of maps, you can see that the areas that are preferred by, that have high potential of bearing hog deers, are also the areas that have a high, that are very vulnerable to invasion. And what does it necessarily means? That if we have this, uh, that will lead to shrinkage of hog deer habitat, and we must have an active management intervention to kind of reverse the process. But there are other issues in Manas as well. So as we all might know, grasslands are generally regulated by fluvial action. There are floods. Most of you have heard of the floods in Kaziranga. How the floods in Kaziranga is essential to maintain the grasslands. They are called the floods are called the architect of the grasslands. But in Manas, since it's located in the foothills of the Himalayas, we do not have floods. And if you see the location of Manas, it's a map you see here. So the grasslands are kind of sandwiched between the southern side, which is human habitation. All those lighter yellow portion you see, those are human habitation. And up north, there are the Bhutan hills. So there is, for the grassland, there is no chances of expansion. It cannot move north because it's densely, there are dense forests there, and it cannot extend beyond the beyond the southern boundary because there are human habitation, there are agriculture fields. So it's kind of sandwich. So whatever grasslands we have in Manas is kind of sandwich between the human habitation and northern hills. And to protect the grassland dependent species that we have in Manas, the hog deers, the pygmy hogs, the Bengal floricans. So these grasslands needs to be actively managed. Unless we manage these grasslands actively, we will be, it will be difficult for us to safeguard all these grassland dependent species. So having learned that lesson, we at RNEC, a team from RNEC has initiated a study back in 2013, where we kind of tested different methods on how to manage this invasive species. And the woody, we also have another problem of woody plant encroachment in grasslands, since the grasslands in Manas are not in a very, not in the what we ecologically we call, it's not in the climax stage. And that means that there is every possibility that grasslands will be slowly engulfed by woodland. It's a natural process. It's a process of maybe 5 decades or 10 decades, but with accelerated human disturbances, the process has been fastened for sure. So we are now trying to manage how these invasive plants and woody plant encroachment can be managed to safeguard the species, to safeguard the habitat, which will eventually help in safeguarding the species. So we have started this. We conducted experiments, and for the three from 2013 to 2016, and we come up with low cost management method, which also benefit the local communities that stay in the fringe areas of Manas National Park. So I'll just walk you through these pictures very quickly. So in the topmost left picture, there is a plot that used to be a grassland, and now it has been completely, more than 90%, the area has been completely invaded by a plant called Cromolina odorata, which is again an invasive alien plant. And the same plant during the flowerings in the next picture. So we went out to field, we collected all the ecological data that we wanted to have before to make a comparison. Then we engaged in local communities from the fringe areas. You see in the picture there with people on the left hand side, and they uprooted the species. They didn't cut it, they uprooted it, uprooted the species, and we continued it for 3 years, and we could see a tremendous grassland recovery, like assisted conservation, of course. And after 3 years, from the picture on the left hand side, we could revive the grassland. We could reverse the invasion and bring back the grassland. So this is an effort of 3 years. So this was done in a very experimental setup. We kind of set up 1 hectare plots for this, and eventually, once the experiment was successful and we could successfully recover the grasslands from the invasive species, we are now continuing. We have now spread across a much larger area in Manaus National Park to safeguard the habitat. And like by safeguarding the habitat, we can save the hog deer. So with this, I kind of end my presentation, and I would like to thank my supervisors and seniors at my organization, the institute where I done my PhD, the Wildlife Institute of India, GTAD Lab of RNA, which provided all these good-looking maps. And thank you all, my friends and colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for the comprehensive presentation on the species in focus as well as the research findings from the work that you've done at Manas. We now move on to the Know Your Zoo part of today's talk. So joined in today to speak to us on the Adina Deer Park is Mr. Siddharth, who is the officer in charge of the zoo, and he's also an Indian Forest Service officer and the Divisional Forest Officer of the Malda Division, West Bengal. And he will speak to us today more on the zoo. So Mr. Siddharth, over to you.
Thank you, Arundhati, and very good evening to everyone. Let me give an overview about our zoo, that is the Adina Deer Park. Adina Deer Park was established in the year 1982 on the Transfer Western Land in the Malda district. The zoo is approximately 20 kilometers from the city of Malda. It is one of the prime attractions in the district, and on an average, it was visited by more than 1 lakh visitors every year. With the introduction of 1 male and 2 female spotted deer, Adina Deer Park started its journey in 1982 in an area of 7.49 hectares, earmarked for the deer park. Later on, during the survey work for the master layout plan, with the addition of the mixed bird aviary and children park, which were included, we further expanded the deer park to its current area of 8.1 hectares. Our zoo is surrounded by Adina Reserve Forest, which serves as a major attraction and even, of course, providing a buffer area for the zoo. A proposal to acquire the additional area of 13.92 hectare Raite land adjoining the zoo area has been a long pending one, and we are trying to make it possible. Presently, 70 hectare area of well-forested land form the deer park and its adjoining forest. The Central Zoo Authority granted conditional recognition of Adina Deer Park as a mini zoo in 2007, and the last renewal recognition was valid up to 2021. And we were expecting our latest renewal recognition, which was carried out very recently. Let me give an introduction about the inventory of the zoo. Our zoo houses majorly mammals and birds as captive animals. And regarding the mammals, we had 2 species, like 100 numbers of spotted deer, axis, and 5 numbers of nilgai, Basilophus stegocamis. And regarding our feather friends, in our mixed bird aviary, we have 6 species, which includes 1 number cockatoo, 2 numbers golden pheasant, 4 numbers silver pheasant, 40 numbers of budrakers, 6 numbers of cockatiel, and 3 numbers of jackfish squid. So regarding this manpower of the zoo, the human resources, currently we have 9 dedicated staff for the zoo, and there are some vacancies for the post of zoo curator, which has been a long pending one, and we are looking towards it. And as an ex officio director and the divisional forest of Malda division, I'm in charge of the zoo. And the latest, the number of visitors which visited the zoo in 2021-22 were around 61,000, which got reduced due to the COVID restrictions of the COVID pandemic. So we had a health advisory committee of the zoo, which meets every year, which discusses about all the vaccination schedules and other things carried out for the captive animals. And the FMD vaccination was done every 6 months for the cattle surrounding the zoo. And the regular deworming schedule were carried out for deer and nilgai regularly. Disinfection schedule were carried out regularly in all the enclosures. So we had 3 enclosures, one for spotted deer, one for nilgai, and other for the mixed bird enclosure. And health checkup for employees for the zoonotic diseases were carried out regularly. It was not carried out in the last year due to the COVID pandemic. And there are a lot of development works that was carried out during the year 21-22, which includes construction of a snake tank, construction of a food court for the visitors, construction of a treatment room for the captive animals as well as for the rescued animals, and the construction of a kitchen cum store. So like with the and all these constructions, they're about to get their completions, and like once they inaugurated, it will further improves the attraction of the zoo, and will further it will increase the footfall of the zoo. And regarding the education and awareness program during the year 2021-22 conducted, there were that Banmotsu was celebrated every year during the second week and third week of July. And this year also, like we had celebrated Banmotsu in our zoo, and as a part of the celebrations, we had planted around 100 numbers of saplings inside the zoo premises. And every year, the World Environment Day is celebrated with many awareness programs for the nearby school students and cycle rallies. And the Wildlife Week will also be observed every year. And last year it was observed on October 8, 2021. And during the observance of the Wildlife Week, a lot of awareness programs were conducted for the school students and the visitors of the zoo. And we don't have any conservation breeding program in the zoo. And currently we don't have any research work carried out for the zoo. And to conclude, being a major attraction in the district and a lot of potential for further growth, we endeavor to work to improve the infrastructure and to keep more diverse species, which helps us to achieve the vision of the zoo. I thank the Central Zoo Authority for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving a brief overview of the zoo. We now move on to question and answers for today's talk. So, Alodika, we take questions for the species first. So, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay. So, the first question for you is that you mentioned that the population of hog deer, where it has been introduced, is doing better than its original distribution range in Southeast Asia. So, do we know what are the parameters that are helping the population to thrive where it has been introduced?
All right. The population in Australia is particularly doing very well. That can be the one reason can be is due to lack of large predators. Here in Hog Deer we have Hog Deer is a prey species to large carnivores, so that can be one reason that we don't have a predator there, and we might have a good protection. I am not very sure of like what is leading to such a good population there, but lack of predation can be one of the reasons.
Right. Right. And the next question for you is that do we know what their home range is and how the resource partitioning is like with where in areas of overlap with other grassland species?
Yeah. So again, the study with the information that we have for this is from Nepal, like what they have studied. The home range of hog deer is small. The home range is again related to the body size of the animal. Since hog deer is a small animal, so the home range is also a smaller, so which is around not more than 2 square kilometer. The studies that have been reported from Bardia and Chitwan National Park. And what is the next part of the question around the thing?
The next part asks that how is the resource partitioning like in areas of overlap with other grassland species?
Right. So for the hog deer, we have the other sympatric species can be swamp deer. So we have a high overlap in terms of feeding. They both prefer the same species to feed with the one-horned rhinos and the swamp deer. We do have a high overlap there.
Right. And the next question for you is that what do we know about the breeding biology of this species, and do we know what the recruitment rate is?
Okay, the breeding biology is again, the information comes from Nepal. We don't have much of information on the species, the shy species. So it gives birth to a single fawn. The litter size is 1 with from a captive population, there was one known information of hog deer giving birth to twins, but it's very, very rare in wild. So we have one, the litter size is 1 for hog deer, and they nurture the baby for around 6 months. So, but it breeds annually, of course. So we have sometimes the mother accompanied by yearlings until it gets give birth to a fawn. And from the observations, there are not much studies on it, but from the observations, it has been found that the hog deers do have a display, like the som deers. The male hog deer kind of show off the antlers with the grasses there. I think I have shown a picture with the grasses on the antlers. So that's one of the breeding behavior, but not much is known about it. Yes.
Right. So those were the questions for you,
Sorry,
Alorika.
just to add to that, yeah,
Yeah.
this hog deer are generally not aggressive. I thought it's important to share. Yeah, so hog deers are not generally aggressive, but it gets a bit aggressive during the breeding season. Chasing for mates and yeah, yeah. Thank you, Arundhati.
Okay, so Alorika, those were the questions for you. We now move on to questions for Mr. Siddharth. So, sir, the first question for you, I think you've already answered, which is that are there any outreach activities conducted by the zoo? So we'll not take this question up. The next question for you is that what are the future plans of the zoo?
The future plans of the zoos, like we are planning to develop a reptile enclosure in our zoo. And regarding that, like I had spoken with the member secretary of West Bengal Zoo Authority, and like he has approved for the same. And like that, in principle, approval will be given soon.
All right, sir. And so the next question for you is that being a deer park, what are the enrichment activities carried out by your zoo?
Yeah, the enrichments, some of the enrichment activities like carried out in our zoo is that like there was an like water bodies inside our two water bodies inside our air enclosures, because the deer enclosure is of 5 hectare area, so like it's a massive enclosure. Like inside this, like we had two water bodies, and like in the water bodies, like every time like we used to apart from the disinfectations things, like we used to uh, give them with some of the enrichments, especially those enrichments, like majorly they were the food enrichments. Like once in a month or once in a week, like we used to have with some new kinds of fruits or seasonal vegetables and fruits, those kind of thing. Apart from that, some of the wooden planks and wooden poles have been kept here for their own purpose.
Right, so those were the questions for you. And with this, we come to the end of our week 71 Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo Talk. On behalf of the Central Zoo Authority, I would like to thank both the speakers, Dr. Alolika Sinha, and to you, Mr. Siddharth, for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us for this talk. I would also like to thank the audience who have been with us throughout, and I hope you've taken back more about the Hog Deer and the Adena Deer Park. And I would also like to inform them that Adina Deer Park will be continuing their outreach activities till the end of this week. So if you are in the area, do visit the zoo as well. And we will be back next week with our week 72 Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo talk, which will be on the fishing cat and the North Bengal Wild Animals Park. So do tune in for that talk next Wednesday from 4 to 5 p.m. And once again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arundhati, and thank you, Central Zoo Authority.